just put one here. The simplest one, race car. That's a pretty commonly used one. This is a palindrome because we can type it backwards and it's still race car. So this is what we're going to be trying to determine if this is truly a palindrome or not. So for example, that is not. Okay. So that's what our code's going to do. So I think the best way of doing this, and there's a lot of different ways you can go about this. One way is we could split it in half. Okay. So we split it right here. So RAC, we basically eliminate this character E because it's in the middle. And if something's in the middle, it's always in the middle, whether it's forwards or backwards. So then what we could do is we could compare, we could split this in the middle and say, okay, compare this to this one that's backwards. Okay, so compare the front of this one to the back of this one and go back and forth until we've compared all of them. That's possible, but it can get a little ugly. But the other way of doing it is to flip it around and then compare the two. I think that's what I'm going to do. So there's actually, let's do this. Let's start in a char array. And this will be the reverse. Let's call it backwards. All right, this is backwards. And we're going to say text.reverse. Now notice that reverse, what it does is it inverts the order of the elements in the sequence, but it stores an IEnumerable char. Well, that's not what I want, but to array. That's what I want. So there's a char array now. Now a char is an individual character. Okay, so R is one char. So we'll have, in this case, 7 places or 7 items. So char of 6, 0 through 6. And each one will store one of our values, but in the backwards order. Let's store another one, char array, called forwards equals text to char array. And that's the just race car, the forward direction, but to a char array. So now you have 2 different arrays, one backwards, one forwards. The 2 should be the same if we compare the 2. Now, there's a couple different ways of comparing these, but I think the easiest way, and this is, let's talk about easy versus performant. I'm going to do the easy way because it's simple, it's easy to read, and it's easy to modify, and it's easy to debug. If I want to be performant, I'll probably do a loop and compare each character with a return true or return false. But I think what I'm going to do instead is say string backwards text equals new string backwards. And that's going to take the char array and convert it back to a string. So now I have my backwards text. I can do my forwards text too, but really that's just text. So I don't even necessarily need this. And so let's leave it there. I want to show you the other way. But I'm going to just do this. And then what we can do is return. Let's put it into an output. Bool output equals, and we're going to say string dot, let's just say, let's wrap it in parens first. String dot compare the text to backwards text. That's a comparison. And I say equals 0, meaning the two are the same, identical, and we're returning that Boolean. So if this is a little complicated for you, another way of looking at it, I'm just putting the if statement here instead of capturing it elsewhere. But let me show you how how we could do this. Sorry, tongue got tied. We could say bool output equals false if, and then we could paste in this right here. if the comparison is the same, 0, output equals true, else output equals false. Same difference, okay? So this right here is the same as this right here. So it's a lot simpler. It's just you have to realize that this evaluation right here comes back as true or false. Okay, so that's the only difference there. I will leave this commented out for you, just so you have the difference here. And then I'm going to uncomment this one, and we're going to return output. Okay, so if you wanted to do it this way, if it makes more sense to you, uncomment this and comment line 25. Okay, let's check and see if this works. So let's do a console.write. Please enter a string. And then we'll do a string text to check equals console.readLine. And then we're going to do a console write line that says text is palindrome and text to check. And we're just going to write true or false right to the command line. So if you type in a word, it's going to put true or false right below it to identify if it's a palindrome or not. Let's try it out. Okay, please enter a string. We know that race car is a palindrome, and it says true. It is. Let's run this again. And let's put test, which is not a palindrome. False. Okay, so we're good. Now, that was the basics of our palindrome check. Before we move on, though, I do want to point out this conversion to a string here. If you didn't want to do that, what we could do is we could do a comparison this way. You still have to convert to a char array for both of them then, but you could say for int equals 0, or I equals 0, I is less than backwards dot length. Doesn't matter which one you choose because since it's the same text, they are the same length. And then you could say, have your output here. Let's comment this out. And let's comment this out. And you can have bool output equals true, actually, in this case. Because we only want to change it to false if we find a non-match. If backwards I, let's do a string compare. String.compare backwards I forwards I does not equal 0. Output equals false. Oops. Char is not how it compare. That's interesting. Well, we're going to do it the old-fashioned way, which will work. Let's clean this up. And instead of doing the comparison with a string compare, we'll do a not equal, since they are char. That's why. So a char is one specific character, so therefore you can do a direct comparison, not a problem. The reason we don't necessarily always do this with strings is because if we want to do a case insensitive or something like that, but with a char, that's not really a consideration. So therefore, if backwards does not equal forwards, the same number, remember they should be a palindrome, so backwards, it should still say race car in the other direction. If they do not, then we return false. And we can actually even break out of the for loop since we're done at this point. That's a little bit of a performance improvement. But at the end, we return output either way. And it should be that if we check out race car, that's a palindrome. And if we check out test, that is not a palindrome. Okay, so that's another way of doing it, just in case you wanted to go that direction. But let's uncomment this out, uncomment this, and uncomment this. Okay, that's probably the way I would do it, is this way, just because it does create a new string and it does do a string compare, but it's a pretty simple thing. Because at the end of the day, if you look, I've got one line here, one line here, and one line here, and then the return. That's pretty simple code to read, which is part of understanding code well, is being able to read it well. Okay? So how do we do this? It's actually quite simple. The easiest way that I see to do this is to say return text is palindrome number to string. Check that out. Pretty simple, huh? So now we can do, let's not worry about actually asking for it here, but what we can do is we can console write line and just pass in a number 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, and it should be a second version on, or the second entry here. So race car, and I got true, true because the second true is for our int. All right. So there we go. We now have our overload for int. All right. Now let's move on and deal with this not handling properly the idea of stack cats. Okay. The way to do this is to clean up our text. So we need to remove anything that's not a character we care about. This is where regex comes in, regular expressions. I just added a using statement for it. Let's call this characters we care about check. It's a really long name, but it does the purpose of explaining what it's doing. Equals new regex. Now, I don't expect you to remember how to type out a regular expression. There's some people that do. I had a coworker that knew